So, welcome to another episode of Church Matters. They're not coming quick and fast quite yet, but who knows? Stranger things have happened. Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about how to live stream your church service. Now, I've seen a few videos on live streaming over the weeks, months, since the whole COVID thing started, and I must be perfectly honest, I didn't like most of the videos. It's not that they were bad, it's just that often they left things out. They left out important things like, how much is it going to cost? Or they'd suggest things that were like incredibly expensive, and it's like, churches have budgets that they have to do, and they leave out important aspects. They just assume you know this, or that you have this, or whatever, and it makes it a little difficult to actually, for someone who's a complete noob, to get into this type of thing. So I thought it might be useful to make a little video and give you an idea of what's out there, what's available, and how you can budget appropriately for something like this. So let's get started. So how do you live stream your service? Well, we're going to look at a couple of different things. One thing we're going to look at is what you need, because that's very important. If you want to do a live stream, you need a few things to be able to get that right. It's similar to what I've got here. You need a few things. First thing you need is money. You need internet access. That's kind of critical when you want to do a live stream. It seems like it's obvious, but in the South African context, which is where I'm from, it's not always there. You need a camera, obviously, but the question is, what kind of camera? Related to that, you need some kind of video capture device. Maybe not, but we'll talk about that. Sound, of course. What kind of sound are you going to use? How are you going to get the sound from your speaker, from your preacher or whatever, into your system? And of course, software. What software can you use? Of course, what type of computer do you need? Because kind of if you're going to make a video and you want to get it up on the internet via live streaming, you kind of need some kind of computer to get it done. And of course, there's a few other little odds and ends that one needs to think about when you want to make a live stream. So let's take a look at money. That's the very first and the most important thing you need to think about if you want to go online. Streaming is not free. Just as with the, they say the best things in life are free, but unfortunately streaming is not one of them. First thing, of course, is you need to pay for some kind of internet access. We're going to look at more detail of what kinds of things you can do, but internet access costs money, and your church needs to have a budget for that, or someone in the church needs to be willing to pay for that. Software. You need some kind of software, and some software is free. You get open source stuff, but some of the software is not, and whatever software you use, you're going to need some way to pay for it. Of course, you need equipment. We're going to look at all the different kinds of equipment that you need to do a live stream, but you need some kind of equipment to get it done. Of course, quality is very important. You need to think about quality because that has an effect on price. You get what you pay for. That's very, very important when it comes to live streaming and just about anything in life. The better quality you want, the more it's going to cost. You need a fast internet connection, you need a better camera, etc., etc. So the first thing we're going to look at is the internet. Now, obviously, you have in principle, you have two options. You have wired or wireless. Now, of course, that comes to a big question as a church. Do you have a building or not? If you have your own building, then you can get wired internet. You can pay for fiber or ADSL or whatever is appropriate, and you can plug it in. If it's not your building, then you either have to get permission or whatever, and of course that becomes a problem. If you want to use Wi-Fi, it becomes kind of tricky unless you're renting a building that already has Wi-Fi. And of course, what are the speeds? Speed becomes important. So cost is also a very important facet because it depends on what your budget is. What can you afford? Because if you can't afford an expensive setup, then you can't have the fastest speed. You can't have 100 megabit per second internet connection. And you don't necessarily need one, but again, that comes down to what type of live streaming do you want to do. And that comes to bandwidth. Cost is related to bandwidth because you need to see a certain kind of minimum bandwidth. at least 4 megabits per second for upload, but then we're talking 720p. We're not even talking HD yet. If you want to stream in HD, you need to be a little bit faster, probably at least 10 megabits per second, if not more. So, and if you want to go 4K, then you're going to need a lot of bandwidth, and that's going to cost obviously more money. One option that you can go for before we start looking at the camera is that, in fact, the option that we went for is we went for a wireless option, LTE. You have to be careful there because it depends on which LTE connection you have. So the first thing we did was we used someone's cell phone. One of the elders had a cell phone with a good contract, and we tried that, and it worked reasonably well, except sometimes the signal wasn't so good, and that was a problem. Then we tried one of the church members had a wireless LTE dongle, and we tried that, and that worked okay. It was reasonably good. It was slightly better than the phone, but it still gave trouble. We're currently using a Huawei wireless device, and it actually works very, very well. We get very, very low frame drops from when using that, and the speed is sufficient. We're only sending out 720p because the service we're using, Sermon Audio, prefers 720p, so we send 720p, and of course it takes up less bandwidth than full 4K or whatever. So that's something to think about. Next thing you need to think about, obviously, is the camera. What kind of camera are you going to use for your live stream? Now, there are a couple of different options. You could use a cell phone. I have seen live streams that have been done directly from a cell phone, and if you wanted to use a tripod or something like that, you could make it reasonably stable. Other option is a webcam. Or you could try a DSLR camera, digital SLR camera, or camcorder. But which one do you choose? Cell phone, you already probably have one of those, and a lot of the cell phone cameras are getting pretty good. I mean, your top range iPhones, even the mid-range iPhones, can do 4K these days. So you can get some pretty good video there, but how do you get it into your computer? It can be done, but it's a little trickier depending on which computer you have. Webcams? Well, webcams can be great, but I found, for example, that webcams are designed for very up close, so if you have to push them further away, you don't get it's too wide angle. You can try and zoom it in, but some have zoom, some don't have zoom. I also have a HD webcam that I used for a while, and you put it up close and everything, but I discovered that it doesn't have very good autofocus. So if your preacher is moving a lot, it gets out of focus very easily, and it's a struggle to get back into focus. You could maybe get a really expensive webcam, but then you might as well buy something else. Now, I chose a camcorder, and there's a number of reasons for that, and we'll take a look at them. For instance, battery life. Now, if you're using a webcam, it's plugged directly into your computer, no issues with battery life, unless, of course, you have a problem with the battery on your laptop. As long as it's plugged into the power, you should be fine. With digital SLRs, with cell phones, you've got the same problem. You have a limited battery life on the thing. So if you can do a full hour, 2 hour long live stream with a cell phone, because your cell phone's got a really good battery, it could work, but you'd probably have to plug it in. But if you're plugging it in, how are you going to get the streaming data off? You need dongles. It gets tricky. Digital SLR cameras come with their own batteries, but generally you can't plug them into a wall socket. I found that for the most part you have to buy a rather expensive device to allow them to plug in and have permanent power. So camcorders pretty much all have permanent power, and that's very important if you're going for longer live streams, because what generally tends to happen is they have an auto shut-off feature, and the auto shut-off feature on most cameras kicks in after 30 minutes. Depending, you can usually set it, but you can't usually turn it off. And you're halfway through a sermon and whoop, your camera goes off. That's not very useful. Like I said, with some you can make them longer, but not really that much longer, so it gets tricky. Whereas when a camcorder is plugged in to power, it just doesn't shut off. Autofocus. As I mentioned before, webcams, their autofocus, if they even have it, isn't the best. It's slow because it's designed for someone like doing what I'm doing, just sitting in front of a camera and talking to it, like you would in a meeting, a Zoom meeting or something like that. They're not designed for preachers that tend to move. Some don't. You get the preacher that's, stands perfectly still in front of the camera and just speaks, and the only thing that moves is his lips. But then you get those that are more expressive. They want to move backwards, they want to move forwards, they want to move to the left, they want to move to the right, and that causes you quite a problem when it comes to getting the autofocus working. Whereas generally a good camcorder has very good autofocus. It's designed for taking pictures of your kid while they're running around, and that tends to require a little more power in the autofocus section. Zoom. Most webcams don't have zoom. If they do, it's very rudimentary, and it's usually digital. A good camcorder has proper optical zoom, which means you can put the camera further away and still get a nice tight shot. So those are very important. That's something that's very important to have. Again, cell phone cameras, same problem. Not much in the way of auto zoom. Yeah, there's not much you can do on that score. And of course, price. Now, I managed to source a reasonably cheap camcorder for 3,750 Rand. You could probably do the translation into dollars if you're in America. So it's not too expensive. But you can get more expensive if you're looking for 4K. I mean, the 3,750 will give you a nice HD, and you probably want to stick to minimum HD, full HD 108p. But if you really don't want to go that route and you don't think you'll ever go that high, a 720p camera you get away with even cheaper. Most cameras these days are at least 1K, so that's a reasonable price. But you can spend more. I mean, obviously you can always spend more, but this is round about what you would expect. So what to look for? That's very, very important when you're looking for a camera to do live streaming. Clean HDMI out, whichever option you go for. Now, if you go for webcam, it's automatic because you don't have HDMI, you're plugging directly into USB and so on and so forth. But if you're buying a camcorder or you want to use a digital SLR or even a compact SLR, it needs to have clean HDMI out. That's very, very important because a lot of the cheaper cameras, they don't have clean HDMI. So the stuff that's usually on your camera, like lines, you've got your grid lines and maybe your battery settings and all that kind of stuff, and what function is running, is all on the output of the HDMI, and you can't obviously put that on a video. So you need to either have a way of deleting that out or something like that. It gets tricky. There are ways and means that you can do that. If you go on the web, you can find quite a few guys that'll explain to you exactly how to do that. You just crop the image or something like that, and you can get rid of all that stuff. But it's not the best possible option for that. Like I said, if you want something with a little bit more longevity, you want at least 108p. You want at least full HD. If you really don't think you'll ever need that, you can go for something like 720p, which is like often the TVs that come like that are called HD ready. So you can go for that. That's an option. Optical zoom, very important. Digital zoom, you're just getting an inferior image. So you want something with a decent optical zoom. How about some other stuff? Well, of course, if you are using a camcorder or not a webcam or a digital SLR or even a cell phone camera, you need some kind of video capture card so you can get the video from your camera into your computer. And of course, a tripod. You need something to put it on so that you can hold it stable. It doesn't have to be a very expensive tripod, but it should be reasonably stable. The more you spend on your camera, you don't want it to fall over. So you want a tripod that can handle it. Let's look at the video capture portion. Most cameras that you have can't be webcams. There are one or two out there that you can just plug directly into USB and they become webcams. In fact, Canon recently brought out a software driver that will allow you to plug many of their cameras in as a webcam. You plug it into USB and it gets detected as a webcam and you just can go. It's not ideal in most cases. You have to work with what you got. If it works for you, then you must do it. And of course, it's also budgetary. If your budget says no, we can't afford to buy a camcorder, but we've got a digital SLR, it's pretty good, and you can plug it in, great. You're just going to have those auto shut off issues, but you can play around with it and see what you get. Now, why do I even mention the concept of a webcam? Well, the thing is, webcams, when you plug them into your computer, they work automatically. That there's no video capture cards or anything like that. And generally, even video capture cards, they detect they are detected as a webcam. So that allows you to plug them into Zoom or plug them into Microsoft Teams or whatever software you're using to connect. Now, there are multiple different options. You get things like video switches that are much more complicated, that you can plug in multiple HDMI sources into them, and then you can switch between them, and you get the software ones like OBS, and you get hardware ones, although we're talking specifically about hardware ones in this case, like I'm trying to think of the example, but there's some hardware ones out there, some slightly less expensive, some more expensive. I mean, you can spend, Roland has one for 26,000 Rand. There's another company that makes them for 6,500 Rand. So that is an option. You get single stream video capture devices. You get ones that are gaming devices, so they actually have a throughput, so you can plug them into your gaming device and then plug from the gaming device directly, or from the streaming device directly into the TV, and that way you can actually watch. You can both show the stream on your TV, and you can send it to your computer. So that's another. Those are other options. Of course, capture rate is important because if you want to do 4K, you need to buy a streaming device that can support 4K. If you want 1K, you need a device that can support 1K. So your capture rate is very important depending on your device. Also, sometimes capture rate can be important when it comes to what computer you're using, because if your computer is too slow, it can't handle 1K or even 4K. It just can't process the signal at that rate. Now, the one that I use, it cost about 1,700 Rand. That was the JVA02 live capture adapter, and that's it. It's very, very simple. It has a single stream. It's not a gaming device, so it doesn't have an out. It if necessary, it can take power. You can even put a mic into it, so you can have an external mic. I don't do that, but you can, and it gets the job done. It's even mountable and such like. It's designed. You can even use it with an Android device. I don't know if you can use it with an iPhone. I've never tried. But those are some of the options that you can play with. Next thing we need to look at is sound. Now, this is critically important, because if your sound is bad, no one can hear your live stream, and then no one will want to listen. So, especially when it comes to preaching. Now, something else I discovered is when I used a webcam. The problem with a webcam was that the sound wasn't very good, because the sound was designed to be right up in your face. So when people were listening to it, they couldn't always hear, and often a preacher uses, he varies his voice, especially some preachers. They'll go very loud and then very soft, and then effectively the sound would just cut out, because the software that was trying to do the streaming, either a Zoom or something else, was saying, whoa, there's just too much sound range, too much dynamic range in the sound, I can't cope. And most of it was due to the webcam, because the webcam's microphone is good enough for just the normal chatting, but it doesn't work very well when you're trying to preach. Also, it depends on the preacher. And because the preaching is the primary reason to do the streaming, and it's the center of your church, or it should be the center of your church's life, you want to make sure that people can actually hear, because if you can't hear the preacher, then what's the point of doing the live stream in the same? Like I've just said, it's not the same as a conversation. A conversation, when you're doing a Zoom meeting, you're just talking normally. Hopefully your boss isn't shouting at you on the Zoom call, but if he is, you might not hear him because the microphone isn't that good. So the words need to be clear. So what are your options if you want to do sound? Well, you can use the webcam mic, but as I said, not ideal, because the webcam mic can't handle the dynamic range it needs. Camcorder mic. I've tried that. It works, and you can even get an external mic, but those things are designed to create to handle outside when you've got a wide range of things that of sounds that you can pick up, but you're just focusing on one thing. You want to get the preacher as loud as possible and as clear as possible, and you don't want all the extraneous background noise. So generally you can use a camcorder mic, but the sound quality is not going to be the best. Other option, USB interface of some sort. Now if we look at a USB interface, and that's the choice that I made, you get the basic. I mean, you get the most basic one, like iRig Pro. iRig Pro is a bit old tech, but there's some new ones with Pro Duo and IO, etc. There's a whole bunch of these iRig devices, and they're very, very simple. They have a input for your mic. They have a battery in them, so you can use a condenser mic that requires phantom power. Or you can get fancier. You can get multiple channels with a Focusrite Scarlett, or the Behringer of the same type of thing. There's so many different options for USB out there. Another option is a sound desk. Usually with USB. In this case, because you need a USB interface, so just a flat sound isn't going to work, because how are you going to get the sound into the computer? You can use the audio in some mic type thing, but then you've potentially got issues with the quality of the sound coming in from that interface. So depending on which computer you're using, you may not get the best quality. So the best is to get it in digitally and put it into your DAW or whatever you're using. Of course, amplification is also important. How are you going to amplify it? If you have a proper sound desk or a USB interface, you generally get them with preamps, and that gives you some oomph in the sound. So that's where the concept of double duty comes in. You know, if you want better sound and you want more control over your sound, then you would use some kind of a sound desk that has a USB interface. Now, something that's very important to think about when you're thinking about your sound quality is processing. Now, when you're doing recording, you can do sound processing after the fact. You can clean up the sound, turn up the treble, turn up the bass, mess with the EQ and all that kind of stuff before you put it out there. But when you're doing live streaming, you don't have that possibility. It's going out when you're making it, which means you need to do the processing on device. Most USB interfaces, your minimal USB interfaces, don't have. They have maybe a gain button and maybe something else if you're lucky. Usually not. They have a gain button and that's it. That's all you get. No processing. So unless there's some software processing in the device that you're using to do the live stream, you don't have any processing. So whatever sound is coming through that microphone is coming out exactly as is. And that can be good, it can be bad. In my experience, it's not always the best. However, if you use some kind of sound desk with USB, you tend to have the option of EQ, which is great. So the thing that I ended up using was a Mackie Pro FX 6 channels. Technically, it's only really 2 channels. Got some other funky stuff, but they call it the 6 channels. That's about 3,200 Rand approximately, and it looks like that. So as you can see, if you look at the picture, you'll see that it has the 2 main mic or instrument channels. You can even plug a guitar in there, so if you want to do music or something like that, you can do that. Of course, this is not going to replace a huge band, because of course you need a lot more channels for a full band, but this has a little FX thing, so if you want effects on your guitar or whatever, you can use that. So it's got some versatility. It has proper XLR outputs and your normal jack outputs for the main output, if you want to do that. In fact, we had a setup at one point where we were streaming and we were actually this device was handling 2 mics, so it was pushing that sound out over a speaker, over an amplified speaker. So then it worked out very well, and it has place for phones and so on and so forth. So, and then it also has USB, so it can plug into your computer. So it's a great beginner option, or if you have a small setup, which of course is the purpose of this video in the first place, is how do you deal with a small setup? Not a church that has like a $5,000 budget for sound equipment and stuff like that. Software. What kind of software should you use when you do a live stream? There are lots of different options out there. OBS is one option. Zoom. Some people use Zoom for church services. In fact, with COVID, we did that because we found that streaming as a service where everyone is there, it's one way. That's the big problem with streaming, is that it's a one-way interaction. You get to watch the stream, but no one else gets to watch you. Whereas you might want some interaction maybe before the service or after the service, and Zoom facilitated that. So when we were in hard lockdown, no one could come to church. Zoom was a very useful option to get the message out there. Now Zoom also has a live streaming capability, so what we would do a live stream through Zoom for those who didn't want to actually connect, or people that weren't in the church that also wanted to be a part of the service but didn't want to actually make a Zoom call. Zoom has that ability. You can do Facebook or YouTube or even any other streaming service. We use sermon audio, so we use that. Of course, a lot of these things have recording capabilities. You might want recording software if you want to use the same system to record the sermon. And if you're already getting the sound in for the live stream, you might as well use that sound and push it out to a recording, and that's something we do as well. GarageBand is an option. I've had some issues with GarageBand, and so I upgraded to Big Sur, but Audacity is also a viable option. Reaper, there's tons of apps, there's tons of DAWs out there that one can use. What kind of computer do you need? Can you just use an iPad? Not really. Will a little 286, work? Can you buy the cheapest Celeron, spend $4,000 on that, and you're all good? Maybe, maybe not. What are the factors that are impacted by this? Memory, CPU speed, software options. Depends. If you buy a Mac, you've got certain software options. If you buy a Windows, you've got different software options. What are the options? You can try a Windows laptop. I had a Windows laptop that I used. In fact, I had an i7 Windows laptop with 8 GB RAM. And of course, I also tried out a MacBook Pro i7 with 16 GB RAM, and then when that broke, I upgraded to a i9, also with 16 GB RAM. And those are the two options that I tried. Now, what I discovered when I did that was that the i7 with 8 GB RAM, it just wasn't good enough. It could get the streaming done, no problem. But what I found is when I tried to do streaming and other things, sometimes the stream, effectively the CPU got hammered because it was doing too many other things in the background. Of course, that was also on Windows, and what tended to happen is that the stream started to stutter as a result. So I had to shut everything else down. I was trying to do recording, and I decided no. If I turned off the recording, then the stream got better. So there were issues with it. When I moved to my Mac and I started using the 16 GB RAM, I found things got a lot better. And of course, Windows, there's a lot more software that runs in the background, which can tend to use up CPU cycles, and and of course, laptops tend to be less powerful than desktop computers. But if you have a system that you have to set up and break down a lot, you probably don't want to use a desktop machine. If you have your own building, again, you can use a fully fledged computer, a desktop machine, gaming platform if you want to. But again, cost. It's going to cost you more. So to get a decent laptop that can do everything you need it to do, yeah, it's going to cost you. That's not cheap. Unfortunately, there isn't a way around that. So if you can get a second-hand machine that's pretty good, or borrow someone in the church's machine, of course there's problems with that, because if they leave, then what do you do? So that's something you need to think about. So what are other things you might need? Well, of course, we mentioned a tripod. You need a tripod for your camera. Potentially additional cameras. Sometimes you want to not just do the sermon, you want to actually broadcast you want to stream the worship. You might want to have a second camera for that. You can't just turn the camera, but it can become problematic. So it might be better to have a second camera. If you have a second camera, you might need another capture device. You might have to go for the video switching option. Again, more and more money. It just adds up to the cost. And of course, that increases the PC requirements, because now instead of having one computer, you have one stream that you're trying to handle. You have two streams that you have to capture. Wireless mic. Now, you can use a wired mic, you can plug it in, either one works, but a wireless mic is very useful. I found, for example, if you don't use a wireless mic and you have a preacher that likes to move around, then you have the sound coming in and going out as he moves away from the mic and closer to the mic. If you use a wireless mic that's attached to his head, wherever he moves, the mic moves with him. So that's potentially a better option, unless you can find a mic that's more dynamic, that can handle movement like that, can up and down, all the rest of it. So it's up to you. I mean, you have to figure out what's worth it from a money-wise, so on and so forth. But a wireless mic is a very good option if you can find a cheap one or even a second-hand option. Of course, cables. You need a lot of cables to set up a system like this, because you need cables to the microphone. You need cables to the computer. If you're going to connect your little sound desk to the rest of the sound system, you need a cable for that. You need cables to connect to your computer. You might need adapters if you've got a computer that's USB-C and your capture card is USB-A. You need some adapters for that. So there's quite a few different types of cables, audio cables. You might need to, in most cases, you'll probably need to buy an adapter for your HDMI output, because most cameras don't come with full HDMI ports. They come with maybe a mini HDMI, so you need to buy an adapter for that. So that's something important. So you might even need a powered USB hub, depending on how many things you need to plug in. If you're lucky, or you've got lots of USB ports on your device, then maybe you don't need a hub. But powered tends to be important. I found in many cases, if you don't have a powered HDMI hub, it doesn't work so good. So that's something to keep in mind. And generally, you probably need a large multi-plug. If you got a couple of devices, I mean, if you're plugging your laptop in, you're plugging your camera in, you're plugging your desk in, you're plugging your wireless mic setup in, that's at least 4 plugs already. So it can get crazy when it comes to all the different things you have to plug in. So you probably need a multi-plug to get that all working. So let's take a look at a few, as kind of a finishing up, a few other things you might want to consider. Singing. Do you want to mic up the singers so that you can listen to them, so you can have them on the live stream? Now, that also potentially causes a problem, because it depends on what songs you're singing. If you're singing old songs, public domain songs, it's probably not a problem. Sermon audio has some issues if the songs are too contemporary. If you've got too much of a band there. Some churches don't like bands, they just want an organ, so you need to keep that in mind. Of course, if you want to do singing, you probably want to mic it up. You might want to add an extra capture device so that you can put the words up so people on the stream can see the words. But of course, that brings up the concept of lyrics. Is it a public domain song? Is it a popular song? You may have the rights to the song if you've done your job correctly and you've signed up with the correct rights organization to be able to sing contemporary songs in your church service, but that doesn't necessarily translate to worldwide streaming, because now there's different licenses in different countries. So unless you're willing to buy the licenses for every country, you might not be able to do that. And whether you're streaming on Facebook or YouTube or anything like that, those can become problems. That's why Sermon Audio just says, please don't do it. So that's important. So there's copyright issues that come in mind, and sometimes style issues that can also be an issue. Do you want to do video recordings? If you have the right computer and everything, you can actually record your whole service. Instead of just doing audio recordings, you can do full video recordings. In fact, Sermon Audio, when you do a live stream, it automatically records your live stream and keeps it available for you for up to 2 weeks. So you can actually just load that and as your sermons. You don't even need to upload the sermon recording. You could just use it as is. Video editing software. If you want to actually make videos, you probably want to edit them, so you can maybe add something at the beginning, something at the end, cut out some of the talky before, and maybe some of the faux pas or whatever after the prayer when they're talking about stuff that isn't relevant to the sermon. So you probably want some video editing software to deal with that. There's some software that's free. If you have a Mac, you can use iMovie, which is free. If you're using Windows, there's less free software out there, but there are a few apps out there you could probably try. So you need to figure out what works for you within your budget and so on and so forth. There's some great software packages that one can use, but they tend to be very expensive, like Premiere Pro, etc., Pro Tools and such like. And of course, third-party services like sermon audio, for example. Do you want to use that, etc., or YouTube, live streaming, whichever. If you're doing Zoom type services, you need a paid account because a free Zoom account only gives you 40 minutes, so you can't even do a full sermon on that. So you need to pay for that. As I said, sermon audio. Sermon audio, you need to get the right account because not all of them include live streaming. So, to conclude, something you have to remember. Live streaming should never replace in-person services. It should either be a stopgap or an addition. So it's very important to keep in mind that we should be in church as church members. We should be together with the body. We should meet together as often as we can. And you should never be in a position where live streaming is replacing in-person services, regardless of COVID or anything like that. Hebrews 10 verse 25 makes that very clear. One reason is the Lord's Supper. We're supposed to have what is often called communion together, and you can't do that on a live stream. And of course, fellowship. It's very difficult to have fellowship. Zoom makes it a little bit better, but even then, it's still virtual fellowship. You want to be able to, meet with other people, talk to them, smile at them, encourage them, that type of thing. It's much easier to do. Now, one thing you can use live streaming for is an advertisement for your church. It's a way to get people who wouldn't normally come to your church to take a look and see, guess the preaching is pretty good, or if you can do the service, I like the worship that they're doing there, and it can give them an incentive to come try it out. So it's something to consider. One other advantage of having a live stream is it can help the sick, the infirm, those in your congregation that for whatever reason can't come to the service at the moment with all the COVID problems. Sometimes people are in quarantine for 2 weeks, so they can't come to church. But if they can have a live stream, then at least they can still participate. Otherwise, they're completely cut off. So that's a way you can do it. So, what can we say about all this? Live streaming is not free. So you have to be willing to, if you want to do it, you need to look at your budget, you need to look at all the bits, figure out what's required, internet, so on and so forth. You're gonna have to invest some time, you're gonna have to invest some money, you're gonna have to get someone who's willing to do it. The cost doesn't have to be exorbitant. The more fancier you want to go, the more it's going to cost. That's a problem. If that's a problem for you, then you may not be able to do it. But it can be done. As I said before, never let live streaming replace in-person meetings. And especially in our current times, it can be a blessing, and it's something to definitely consider. And it can be very helpful. But you have to keep these other things in mind, that you don't end up with a situation where people don't come to church anymore because I guess I can just live stream it. So use wisdom in deciding, one, whether you want to live stream, and if so, how. Be good stewards of your finances, the church's finances, of the money that's been given in the collection plate, and so on and so forth, and through tithes and offerings. We need to be good stewards of what God has given us, and use wisdom in deciding whether you want to do it, how you want to do it, and how much money you're willing to spend, and what quality you're willing to accept. And have fun with it. It can be a lot of fun. It can be a great experience. And hey, you can get in touch with technology, and you can get your message out there to a wider audience. I mean, we've had, in our live streams, we've had like 6 connections from Ireland. We've had some from Canada. We've had some from the US. We've got someone that connects to us from Uganda from time to time. We've had connections, people connecting via the live stream from various different countries. So it can be very, very useful, and it can be very, very powerful to help spread the message and the gospel and the good news out there, and gives the church more exposure and gives people another way to connect. So it's something that can be a great experience. It can be a lot of fun, and it can be good. But at the end of the day, you have to decide, use the correct amount of wisdom. So, thank you very much for listening. Hopefully this video was of use to you and was helpful. I mean, that's the most important thing. That's why I want to make this video, is I want to be able to help people to make informed decisions when it comes to live streaming and how to do it and what to do. And if it was useful to you, give it a like, I'd say subscribe, but I'm not making enough videos to warrant a subscribe just yet. But if you want to see when I make new content, go for it. Click that subscribe button. I'm not going to complain. Maybe I'll have 5 subscribers at some point in the future. I don't expect to be the biggest YouTube channel on the planet, talking about things that not that many people care about. But if you're a small church and you want to, or even a big church, and you want to hear about things that are important to the church, this is the place to go. I want to actually do a video on the pros and cons of live streaming. But this one has been more about the practicalities of how to do it. But I think it might be useful to look at whether you should do it at all. I think it's a good idea, but some people disagree, and we'll look at the various options. So thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.